Let me introduce our guest speaker for the evening. You probably already all know her, but Marilu Knode joined Sculpture Milwaukee in 2017 and serves as the Director of Curatorial Affairs and Education and co-curator since 2018. Knode returned to Milwaukee after 7 years as Executive Director at Lomier Sculpture Park in St. Louis. Knode has a broad background in supporting artistic innovation and production and was the American Commissioner for Nancy Sparrow at the Cairo Biennial in 1998 while working at Innova. Remember Innova? UW-Milwaukee. Through her travel, lectures, and curatorial work, Knode is an active member of the international museum community and has written for many national and international publications. She was a fellow in the Getty Leadership Institute's Executive Management Program in 2016. So welcome, Marilu, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this program for CAS. There was a lot of interest as we talked about what type of programs we wanted to do virtually. There was a lot of support for the idea of Sculpture Milwaukee. I think people are really interested in this. I have to say, personally, I want to thank you for somehow pulling this off. In this year particularly, it's been such a wonderful reminder of the power of art, and it's like a light at the end of the tunnel, a return to normalcy. So I know it was really a difficult time this year, so I want to personally say thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Margaret, and also Aaron, for inviting me. And in fact, it has been a tough year, and really I give credit to our board for really sort of, crunching the numbers and figuring out how can we do this and pull it off, since Sculpture Milwaukee is already socially distanced. And really, frankly, given the fact we're all sort of under lockdown, to go outside and get a little exercise and have something to think about is doubly important for us all this year. So I'll talk a little bit more about some of the other adjustments that we made so that we could bring the work to our community.
Great. Okay, so Erin, if you want to just pull up the slides. And I asked Marilu to, before we get into the specific works for the exhibition this year, just to give a little bit of a kind of a background. It might be a refresher for many of you about the kind of history of Sculpture Milwaukee. They've done a lot of really important work in very few years, Marilu. So why don't you go ahead and begin?
Great, thank you. So Erin, we can go, yes. Next slide, there we go. So Steve Marcus, chairman of the Marcus Corporation, is the founder of Sculpture Milwaukee. He started thinking about Sculpture Milwaukee about 14 years ago, and it took that long just to talk people into this idea of bringing a curated public art program to the streets of Milwaukee. Steve's goals included to create yet another legacy gift like Summerfest for the city, to add to our robust arts community by making culture accessible to all visitors and residents, and then to add to the revitalization that had been happening downtown over the past decade. In the first meeting I went to with the Sculpture Milwaukee team in February 2017, I'd never met Steve before, but he talked about when they first started Summerfest, it rained so heavily that the first year it was very muddy. He said it was terrible. We thought for sure we wouldn't do it again. And then the second year it was worse rain and worse mud, and we thought for sure this is it. And then the third year some other disaster happened. And I think his energy and inspiration has really helped everybody on the team solve our problems. So I will tell you, in 2017, we had it to about 2 weeks before we were starting to install, and we still hadn't bridged this one little gap between the engineering and the conditions on the street. And the phrase field verified came up from one of our engineers, and we all realized that fills the gap, so that you get on the street and all of a sudden you need another bolt, you go down to Granger, you buy a bolt. So it's been a great deal of problem solving on the street, and I think that that's why we've been able to be so robust in 4 years. But what you don't see the problems, we as museum people always see the problems, but luckily everything is safe, and we're really excited about how this year was pulled off. So next slide, please, Erin. So as you all know, I really want to thank the folks who bring us to the streets. We're a hybrid public-private partnership. In other words, most public art programs started in the 1960s were funded by municipalities. Over the past decade or so, most public art programs are privately funded. We do get support from the city of Milwaukee, however, nothing financial and outright. So public art is always free to the public. However, we have a lot of need for resources to make everything sort of fulfill our hopes and dreams. But we also need new ways of solving the problems of installing artwork. We continue to look for unique earned revenue streams in addition to all the fundraising that we do from local philanthropists, corporations, foundations. But it's really our local people who make us really come alive. Our economic impact is multiplied from year 1 to year 3. I can't comment on 2020 as none of us can really imagine what the impacts of this year will be on us. But our funds are generally spent locally, so we have a real multiplier effect. For every dollar we spend, it's about $2 of spending in the community. So every nonprofit arts organization is incredibly thrifty with their dollars and really has an impact locally. So next slide. So this is a picture from 2018. Sculpture Milwaukee has the same kind of team and skill sets as any other visual nonprofit arts organization. And that includes right now an executive director, curators, a registrar, a marketing professional, an education team, an accountant, and a volunteer board and committee members. And of course, we need galleries, artists, and other nonprofits to lend us artwork. The next slide. And we also work with outside teams, including riggers, shippers, security, engineers, daily maintenance, landscapers, the City of Milwaukee's Department of Public Works, electricians, welders, concrete people, and any other skill sets as needed. And then next slide. We need conservators and fabricators, storage facilities, and again, different kinds of skill sets. So this is one of my favorite images. This is Bessa Hagian, who owns Vanguard Sculpture Services, at our storage facility, and she's sanding off the patina of the Bernard Venet that we showed 2 years ago. And that surface is easily rubbed by the strapping to move the piece. So we brought the piece indoors. Beth and 2 helpers, one from her team and one from Methods and Materials, they sanded down the entire piece and then sprayed it with a very light mixture of water and lemon juice to restart the process of the patina growing on the surface again. But I also think this is kind of a weird, wacky image you don't see very often. You'll notice it's a warehouse facility. It's got a concrete floor. I suspect ma'am's conservation areas are a little bit cleaner than this. Our education partners include the Milwaukee Art Museum, docent programs. The education team has been really central to our success, and I really want to thank everybody at MAM for lending us your team's expertise. We've worked with True School, Ex Fabula, the Boys and Girls Clubs, Betty Bryn's Children's Museum, and many other groups. And so although you may not see us when you look at the works, it takes over 100 experts, donors, sponsors, and partners to bring the show to life. So this year was really very difficult for us because when COVID-19 started shutting galleries down, we lost access to the artwork. Also, a lot of the shippers could not work as well. Therefore, we were quite delayed in installing the works late July and early August. So we're still kind of gearing up for some of our educational activities. So if you look at our website over the next week, a couple of weeks or so, you'll be seeing some things coming to life. So, but this year, we can move on to the next slide. This year we have 19 artworks by 19 artists. And I'll go through these fairly quickly. I hope you all will take some time to go outside. These images are really, really beautiful, but there's nothing like feeling the wind in your hair and listening to the birds. It really gives a very different context to experiencing the works when you're outside. So this is Milwaukee-based artist Maggie Sassa's Lighthouse, and I'm hoping you all recognize this building. It's something that's in our landscape. Maggie was a Mary Knoll grant recipient, and she produced this piece for the Knoll exhibition in 2016, and I was really charmed by the work when I saw it. And I approached her in 2018 about whether or not she could rebuild the interior so that the piece would be robust enough to be installed outside. Now, it took us a year and a half or so to get the right engineering solutions to get the piece reinstalled. So Maggie and her husband, Ben, who's actually an engineer, completely refabricated the internal structure for the work itself. Maggie had to open up the panels for the windows and the doors so that there's some wind that could blow through. And we're really quite happy with how the work looks. And it's a very charming piece because while it seems like a dollhouse when we're looking at it from the cliffs overlooking the water, it's really very much just shrunk down, again, next to Northwestern Mutual, but it is a 4-story building. And that's really the interesting thing about public art. When the scale changes so dramatically, it changes the way you think about the world around you.
Yeah.
Maggie,
Marilu, I have a question. Yeah. Can I just ask a question about, since the very first installation of Sculpture Milwaukee, you've always included local artists. Mm-hmm. How does that, I know that's something you'll do every year, but is there a balance you're looking for each year? Is it, how do you go about selecting local artists?
So since year one, that was curated by Russell Bowman, who was the founding art advisor for Sculpture Milwaukee, we feel that including artists in our region is critically important. It really shows the maturation of the arts community in the city of Milwaukee, that we have artists who can make the leap from indoors to outdoors. It's a much more expensive proposition, frankly, to create something like this. So obviously we invested in Maggie and the materials for her to be able to accomplish this transformation of her piece. But it allows Sculpture Milwaukee to always invest directly in an artist's growth. And that's really important to everyone involved with Sculpture Milwaukee. Every year we have different numbers of artists from the region. It depends partially on the feasibility of getting the works completed in time. This work might have been available last year, but there were still some real engineering issues to solve. So it's here with us now. Budget's also another issue. So commissioning artwork, we try to do 1 or 2 pieces every year, but it really depends what our resources look like. But we expect to always commit to including artists from Milwaukee for sure, and then the greater region.
Great.
So Maggie comes from a fibers background, and she had read a story in the paper about how a very, very, very strong storm had shaken the walls of the lighthouse. Now, these are 10-foot thick concrete walls. And when you think about the force of nature on what appears to be a little dollhouse, it's pretty overwhelming to really think about it. The piece is called Too Much Sea for Amateurs, and evidently that's a phrase when people take their little boats out onto rough seas. The lighthouse people have said, oh, that's too much sea for amateurs. So there's really sort of an interesting sense of danger, but also sort of the nature of working around water where you have to really be a community. There's a really sweet little flag on top of this piece, and you can see it's a little red bird. It's not a cardinal. I forget the name of the bird, but it's a species that actually is more inland away from the lake, and it migrates through the center of Wisconsin. One of them was blown off track during a pretty big storm, and it hit the lighthouse, and the lighthouse people brought the bird inside, nurtured it back to health, and then released it. So there are all these really lovely little elements about the piece itself. When you see the work up close, you'll notice there's some very interesting stitching on the windows. That's because the windows were all broken out and they just replaced them with plywood. So she's really affecting some of the textures of the concrete building. So next piece, Erin. You all know this piece. It's been sort of squatting outside your front door for a second season. This is by British artist Richard Woods. When we talked to him about keeping it for a second year, he decided he'd like to repaint the piece just to refresh the way people see it. Richard comes from a sculpture and carpentry background and has been making these little DIY houses to think about, the sort of habit of British caravanning in the summer, but also the idea of housing insecurity for the refugee crises happening around the globe. When he repainted the house pink, it sort of took on new meaning for me because the piece seems very vulnerable in a way, like someone's skin, very vulnerable to touch. When you think about the isolation that Maggie Sasso's Lighthouse represents, and then this little house, having housing for yourself in this age is really becoming much more tenuous. And I think that there's some really very, very kind of thoughtful and deep things in the work, even though it is really a very pop object. It looks like a Patrick Caulfield painting, very sweet with the graphic outlines of the architecture itself. But the idea of home has really, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it seemed that it survived the winter quite well, actually. It looks great with the new fresh coat of paint, but it suffered through some weather last year.
It sure did. And Margaret, I did a piece in plywood at my last post, and it only lasted one winter. So I don't know if that had to do with all the ice storms we used to have in St. Louis, but I know we're all a little bit surprised too. And we're thinking if it can make it through another winter, anytime. This was a commission piece. We paid all the costs for production. We worked with the Great Lakes Community Conservation Corps, which is a training program based on a program from the 1930s to teach teens who maybe don't love school some skill sets so that they can enter into the workforce. The president of the school and the students were so happy with working on this particular work that they've started an arts unit for the Great Lakes CCC, which makes us really pretty proud. So it's really about sort of creating a funnel and a pipeline for younger people to come into the arts. You could be a theater person, you could work for artists or collectors or museums. There are lots of ways in which the skill sets you get in the arts are applicable really much more broadly. So next slide. So this is by British African artist Thomas J. Price, who hacks into art history with his figure entitled Within the Folds, Dialogue 1 from 2020. So I'll talk sort of about the obvious social meaning of this piece. Thomas Price is really challenging what our traditional monuments are typically, which is white men, politicians, warriors, conquerors, who represent history from the side of the victors. And I would say for the last 20, 30 years or so, artists, arts organizations, and the general public are challenging how we're telling only one narrative in our public spaces. By creating this work based on an immigrant community in London, where the Windrush generation settled, these were immigrants from the Caribbean who settled in the UK, Price questions how and who deserves to be celebrated in our common spaces. But I want to get back to the title for the piece, Within the Folds, Dialogue 1. So when you go through art history, you spend quite a bit of time in your Greek and Roman classes talking about the skill set of the Greek sculptors to create the sense of a soft body and soft fabric from a very hard material like marble or bronze. So here you see this figure, and he's got a nice hoodie, very metrosexual, sports gear, very current, the very slouchy pants. If you go around the back of the piece, you can see his cell phone in his back pocket. And so he's a very contemporary figure. We've placed him at the US Bank building, sort of looking up and over across the street. And there's something really very majestic about the work. Raising it above street level was important to me, so that you always can see him from all directions. In the way that we put, Nelson in Trafalgar Square, we really want to think about this kind of figure that I think we're all pretty aware of, that we need to spend some time really elevating and really supporting. A lot of people have been asking about the relevance of this work today. This work was relevant to us a year ago when I first reached out to Thomas Price, but also 10 years, 30 years ago, 50 years ago. The arts are often an area where artists are pushing our understanding about the status quo of society and can ask questions about how we think about the world in which we live. They are subjected to the same kinds of things the rest of us are. I think this is an incredibly important piece, and I'm really proud to have it here in Milwaukee this year. So next image, please. This piece was a really big test for Sculpture Milwaukee this year. This is a video by Sky Hopinka, who you all know. He's First Nations, Ho-Chunk, and Pechanga Ben of Luiseno Indians, and an artist with family connections to Milwaukee. He went to school at UWM. Sky is part of a new generation of Indigenous art practitioners who explore land ownership and equitable social behaviors before the country was colonized, before the continent was colonized. And this work is a really lovely meditation about language and connection to place. So I bring up how this work kind of challenged our team. So why is a video considered sculpture? I don't know if you all remember, a couple of years ago, I borrowed a piece by Ana Prvaki, a Serbian artist, and it was a chalk spray painted shadow of Michelangelo's David. We spray painted it on the corner of 6th and West Wisconsin. We're really trying to stretch the public's understanding of what sculpture is. Video is a very consistent material for use in the art world, and certainly you all have shown a lot of video work at the Milwaukee Art Museum, but I think in public art, people are just getting accustomed to the idea that video outdoors can be considered sculpture as well. So we have one of the many compromises we made because of COVID-19 is we've got 3 moving image pieces on this flat screen TV, which is mounted in the window at Modgen in the 3rd Ward. We expanded into the 3rd Ward this year in a partnership with the Black Box Fund. So we've got 3 pieces. They run 24 hours each. I know that people will be a little frustrated. They don't see all 3 works at once. One of the pieces is a never-ending loop, and you would never end it. So we had to actually give ourselves some parameters so that the other 2 works were shown in time. The next piece.
Can I just mention to the CAS members that you'll know Sky Hopinka because CAS just purchased a video by the artist just 2 weeks ago. It was official. So it's officially in our collection, which is great. So that's another nice connection between Sculpture Milwaukee and the museum.
Fantastic. And partially because of growing up in Canada, where conversations around, First Nations peoples was active, I think that this is really going to be a conversation that we press on much harder in the future. Now that, we finally are sort of grappling with all the implications that the Black Lives Matter protests have brought to much, much more attention of many more people in the country. I think we need to think a little bit about who was here originally. So I just sat in on a Zoom call about doing an acknowledgement at the beginning of all the programs. The Milwaukee Film does this too, where they talk about the peoples who came before us. And I think that there's something very honorific about that. And I think we'll see more and more museums exploring those topics as well. So next image, please. So African Jamaican artist Neri Ward has lived in the United States for decades. And here you see his piece based on the Apollo Theater sign. And Neri is asking us to think about voice, who has it, who's allowed to express it, and where they're allowed to express it. So this sign flickers between Apollo, like the Apollo Theater sign, and pole. So on the right-hand side, you see the piece that says pole. And it's a real timely commentary on some specific things that are rather urgent in contemporary society. Voting insecurity has always been an issue in this country. Voter ID laws have been used to suppress voting across the country, but this recent really very dramatic problem with the post office budget and COVID-19, I think has really endangered something that I think of as pretty central to our democratic ideals. So there's some really layered meanings here. Neri talks about being from another country, and in Jamaica, they use a real patois of English and French and Spanish and then indigenous languages. And so he really believes in language as it slips between meanings. And I think this piece really sort of illustrates that. In this piece, he also refers to Amateur Night at the Apollo, where the audience gets to vote people, you know, on or off the island of performance. And I think that that's a really kind of a nice continuity of audience participation. So we placed this piece at the Wisconsin Center District, thinking about the DNC. That did not quite happen, but we really feel that this is an important location for the work. We've been trying to work with some voter registration folks around town. One of the problems with downtown right now, though, is that we don't have a lot of people sort of passing through, just, you know, tourists, whoever it might be, residents, et cetera. So we're going to continue to try to encourage League of Women Voters and other groups, Souls to the Polls, to really use this as an inspiration to get people to register to vote. I will also say that oftentimes Sculpture Milwaukee team has to put works in very specific locations around the Wisconsin Center District. It's the only set of sidewalks that can handle 14,000-pound artworks. Most of the sidewalks downtown are hollow, and we have to be really very careful where we put things. We work with engineers to make sure that we're mounting things so they can't be removed. The planters that we use, I was a little concerned about using them the first year, but I realized they're fantastic passive security. They provide really great protection for the artworks. And so we're always looking for a balance of very large works, mid-sized work, and small works to really challenge what people think sculpture might be.
I think Mary is such a great example of artists who really do push the boundaries of what is sculpture. His retrospective last year at the, or earlier this year in the new museum was one of the best exhibitions I've seen for the last couple years. And his work is really, you know, there's no two things look the same. And he really does push interpretations of sculpture and using found objects and the kind of approach to art making. I think he's one of the most interesting artists working right now in this moment. And so I'm just thrilled that you were able to bring his work to Milwaukee.
Thank you for bringing it up, Margaret. Absolutely agreed. And I think the diversity of his production and his inventiveness is really very inspiring. And he's been doing this kind of work for a very long time. I think history has caught up with him in some ways. I also want to say to everybody that in recognition of COVID-19 and the fact that we're not getting out as much as we would like, I started a reading group this year, and I asked all the artists if they would submit some names of books to us, things that have inspired their work, but specifically related to the works that we have in Sculpture Milwaukee. And one of the books that Neri suggested was a kid's book based on the voting, sort of exploring the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So check out our website. We'll have the list of books. We are looking for volunteers of people who want to do a book report. So you can reach out to me afterwards if you want to do one. So next image, please. You know, this is one of the pieces that Russell Bowman curated into the exhibition. And I'm sure you all recognize Lawrence Weiner's work. At the same moment is an incredibly fluid and evocative phrase, and has taken on a great deal more meaning right now. The location is the skywalk between the Hilton and the Wisconsin Center District. And what is important to me with this location is that it's really the pivot point between east and west, and then north and south. And there are a lot of, you know, conflicts between those spaces in the city of Milwaukee. And as we talk about, you know, the history of segregation in the city, even the fight between, you know, Juneau and Kilbourne, I think that there are a lot of these kinds of conflicts, social conflicts that are written through our city and how our city is built. So at the same moment is really a very thoughtful way to think about the people who are opposite of you, the people who are away from you, maybe just the fact that we each have contradictory ideas in our own minds. The fact that it's on both sides of the skywalk and it's front and back on both sides really shows the simultaneity of the ideas that we have generally, that we think about things logically, but also very emotionally. And as we're coming upon our voting our November election, I think that this becomes even a more important thing to really meditate on.
And Wiener's another great artist of an example of an artist who pushes the definition of art and sculpture using words. And, you know, he speaks of his installations as sculpture, specifically sculpture, and the idea of word as artwork. And of course, CAS will remember that we did the exhibition a couple years ago with Lawrence Weiner there, and really one of the most important artists, certainly of the 20th century, and still going, and has a really great studio who work around him, and he's still out there, you know, making his voice heard. So he's a real treasure in the art world. He's also, I've come to know, it's so interesting, a lot of the younger artists who we've worked with over the last couple of years, like Rashid Johnson or Titus Kafar, who was in Milwaukee earlier this year, when we're talking, they all know Lawrence Weiner, and they all go and smoke cigars with Lawrence Weiner and drink whiskey. So I think he does have a kind of interesting mentor role with some of the younger artists working today.
I think that's so important, Margaret, that there's so much wisdom and history somebody like Lawrence Weiner represents, that it's not just sort of a real focus on objects, it's about ideas, and the fact that his generation was really dematerializing the art object, and how much resonance that still has today for so many generations of artists. You may produce something at the end of your process, but it's the journey and the thinking behind it that sort of animates someone like me and you as well, that the balance between the beauty of the object, the complexity of the object, and then the ideas, bringing those two things together, I think is what makes a really great contemporary artist. And I've always said that it's the artists who tell me something about the world that I do not know that makes me really gravitate to an artist's work.
Right. Or someone who they ask the question, but they don't give you the answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Asking questions is an important thing for an artist to do. Yep. Mm-hmm. So next image, please, Erin. So you all, I am sure, will recognize Alex Katz. You have several works in the collection, Margaret. And you all probably also know that Alex Katz was doing these really very poppy artworks in the early 1950s in advance of Andy Warhol. And in fact, I found a great quote where Andy Warhol totally acknowledges Alex Katz as an influence on his work. And Alex Katz has long been known as a chronicler of the world in which he lived, the New York bohemian avant-garde circles in which he and his wife Ada, who is depicted here, really lived. And so he's depicting a very specific moment in time, but it's never about the people in his work. It's always about how can he create something that's really very formal using some of the elements that other painters use. So this is Park Avenue Departure. You can see Ada in sort of a slouchy beach outfit in one of our planters, which is very good for passive security, as I mentioned before. But what's really intriguing to me about this piece is that Ada's face is not depicted on either side. So you see what you think is the backside. The other side is also the backside. And I find this very intriguing. I don't think Alex Katz is known for his very actively feminist take on the world. I think his concerns are a little bit different than that. And yet I find this work has a very interesting reading because of the way that we judge women in public space, in the public fora. And he's really refusing that. And I find that really very intriguing. It's just one of the ways that I've been thinking about this piece in general. And then next piece, please, Erin. This is another work by quite a well-known artist, Julian Opie. He's a British artist, quite well known for these figures who are walking using very, very commercial technology of a signboard. And I've been thinking a lot about the two different presentations of a female form in these two works, Alex Katz and the Julian Opie. Here we have a woman named Natalie. It's based on a living person. She has a very short skirt on, but a very tight bun. And so there's a really nice balance between her being sort of frothy and playful, but she's really very, very deliberate about the way that she's presenting herself. This piece was chosen by Northwestern Mutual to have within their campus area. And I love very much the placement of this work on the east side, over by the new NM campus. Women have really very much been integrated into the economic centers of power in our country and in Western Europe for sure, and other parts of the world. And I think it's really interesting to consider how women have picked up the workplace. I don't like that phrase. I think it genders the relationships that we have a little bit too much, but it is something that economists talk about. She's walking, Natalie is walking. She has a very specific gait. And Opie has made a lot of different works like this. There are different generations, different ages, different ethnic backgrounds. There was a piece with a sick man who had a turban on. So Opie is really thinking about how people are what make our cities very unique. He's concerned about the homogenization of our cities with our architecture, our shops, etc. And yet Natalie is somebody who's really very unique and walks in the space with us. Our marketing, so Margaret, you asked earlier about feedback from folks. Our marketing, my marketing colleague Meg Strobel mentioned that this piece is based on a real woman. And one of the pieces of feedback she got was, well, that's not a real woman. That's just a skinny girl. Most of us are shaped very differently than that. And I thought that's absolutely legitimate. Somebody else then responded, well, it's just like a woman in contemporary society. She keeps walking. She never gets anywhere. A little sadder perception. That yesterday I took a group from the Women's Club on a tour, and they said, yes, but we're only seeing her at a moment. We don't know where Natalie is going. We don't know what her day is like. This is only us capturing her at a moment. And that's true for how we see everyone else. We only see people in moments. And so, when we talk about portraiture, we're only capturing somebody for a moment. We recognize them, but we also project onto them the tropes and types that we examine and that we experience in our own lives. So it really sort of challenges how we see the people around us.
I love seeing these in cities. I remember being in Dublin, and they have a couple of them in these crosswalks. And it really, Opie really did change move the bar a little bit in the whole public art discussion, because it was when the work first started popping up in cities, it really was a blending of advertisement and artwork. We're used to seeing advertisement moving in public spaces, if you think of Times Square or whatever, but as a work of art, as a work of public sculpture, it was a bit revolutionary when these first started getting placed throughout cities.
Absolutely. And also, just as we've had, for example, last year, the Sam Durant signboards, and this year, the moving image works, we really think a lot about how can we enliven the streets at night as well. So we've lit most of the works. Sometimes that's more effective than others, but to have a work like this that will be so vibrant and so visible at night gives people something else to take a look at when they're downtown in a different time. So we're really just trying to encourage people to see the city in different ways at different times of day. So next image, please. So you all know William Kentridge. You showed a really very magnificent piece of his in 2017. You likely know that he, for some of the characters in his films and videos, he grabbed things from his daily life to animate them. And this piece is based off a corkscrew. So he actually has a much larger version of this figure called Corkscrew. And so he calls all of his figures part of the lexicon of his narratives. What I love very much about this piece and its installation, you can't really tell so much from this angle, but the figure is sort of standing upright, like it's proud. Now, on the one hand, this is a very figurative sculpture, but it also looks like the human body stripped of its flesh. And so there's something really very explicit about that. There's actually a Seymour Lipton sculpture on the Riverwalk over by the Bronze Fawns that has very evocative. It's got feet and then a similar sort of skeletal structure that's exposed. when you think about Seymour Lipton in post-war America, thinking about the war and its impacts and depredations on human life, Kentridge is talking it also about the depredations of apartheid on the minds and bodies of people in South Africa. That being said, it's a really very cheerful little piece. We put it on a box that we made to hold it in the exhibition in the gallery in New York. They just used the shipping crates for the work, and I thought that the textual contrast between the bronze and the wood is really quite elegant. The wood really is very, very warm and gives some really nice, really highlights the sculpture, and you can see it more clearly on the street. So next image, please. So new this year, we have invited some guest curators to bring some additional works to us. And this piece was curated by MAM's very own Lisa Sutcliffe. This is a piece by the artist Leslie Hewitt called 42. It's one of the works at Mod Gen. And this is the piece that is an algorithm that runs on a machine. And so that it's never ending and never repeating. And Leslie has created this really string of poetry based on research that she did on the archives and images for a bookstore in Harlem that ran for 42 years. And that's where the title comes from, 42. So she's exploring the language of a social space used by African American, African diaspora, intellectuals, people to think about how is Africa in our imaginations changing at a very pivotal moment in American history. A lot of these bookstores have been closed. This particular bookstore was very closely monitored by Herbert Hoover and the FBI and harassed to some degree, really infiltrated. And some of the stories that you hear about Black Power movements and the Black Panthers, this bookstore is part of that story. But it's an elegant piece. We've put a bench out in front of Mod Gen so you can sit and watch it for as long as you care to stay there. But really every image that I see of the piece is something different. It really evokes like Guinea, Schaumburg. So those are two very interesting places, the history of the country Guinea, and then the Schaumburg Center in Harlem, which has been such an important repository for the history of African Americans in New York and across the country. Shade has a lot of different associations today too. So it really evokes a lot of quite lovely, I think, thinking around place and our responsibility to each other. So next image. I'm sure you all recognize, I would say he's today's chronicler of contemporary pop culture, Tony Tassett. I'm thinking he's the Edith Wharton of our generation. Or, there may be some other 19th century chroniclers where that would have some really good resonance. This is called Blob Monster. It is as it appears. Tony poured different colored polyurethanes on metal infrastructure to create this image. What I love very much about this piece, that it has some really fun associations. You think about Scooby-Doo or Monster Inc. You think about the monsters that each of us holds within ourselves. But kids also really love this piece. So every couple of days when I do look at our social media flood, it's just kids hanging around this really big monster. It's a very playful piece. He's using the drips of Jackson Pollock in a very playful way. And I also think that it's pretty consistent with the way that Tony thinks about pop culture. He loves American culture. He's a real devotee. He ingests it. He's of it. He lives it. But he's also critical about some of the issues that come from it as well. This location is right by the Federal Building. It's the first time in 3 years where we've had access to that corner. What's really lovely about this location is the building itself is a very muted gray, and so the color of the piece really pops against it. But also this is where a lot of federal agencies live, like Homeland Security is in this building as well. So there may be some subtle associations you can draw from the location if you know what's in that building. Otherwise you would never think about it and just think, what a lovely, rough, kind of crazy, piece this is against this very elegant 19th century building.
Is he the first artist that you've shown more than one work of?
No, there's actually another artist this year where we've brought back a piece, and that's Jim Dines. That's a very good question, though. Yeah. And that's a good question, though, too, Margaret, because his mood sculpture from 2017, 2018, the giant emoji, the smiley faces, and then the arrow piece, which is an arrow going down and an arrow going up, that was also a very relevant piece for the election cycle that we had just been through, and asked some very interesting questions about, you know, we're obsessed with voting people on or off our islands. One day you're in, one day you're out, if you listen to Heidi Klum, but it also is about voting too. So that the issue of voting goes back a couple of years as well in Sculpture Milwaukee. So next image, please. This is a very playful piece. I think Paula Crown also is a very pop artist, according to this. If you look at this image, as you can see, it's a giant solo cup that has been crushed and tossed to the ground. Paula thinks about a couple of different things with her work. She thinks about the individuality of the way people crush cups and throw them to the ground. She thinks about party culture that, you know, really is very much about today and throwing garbage to the ground. They don't care about tomorrow. We place this piece in the Third Ward because in a normal year, it really is the crossroads of people going to and coming from all the festivals in town. It's a real party central. When you talk to the restaurant people in the area, you see the residue of that party culture in the streets in the morning after the festivals or just any other party night. But it's a very beautiful and very, very elegant giant work. Quite a complicated infrastructure to root the piece on site. It's not embedded in the bricks. We weren't allowed to do that. And so the team put together something around it so they could hide the infrastructure of the work itself. But the most important theme in Paula's work like this is the rising scourge of single-use plastic and the impact it's having in our waterways and for our health and the health of all the other creatures that we share this earth with. And particularly since we are stewards of one of the Great Lakes and the system of the Great Lakes, I think this is a particularly important conversation for us to be having. And this piece was also brought to our exhibition by Michelle Grabner, who's one of our country's great artists, great critic, great curator. She's on the board at Sculpture Milwaukee, and I know she's on the board also for MAM. So just another way in which Michelle is impacting our community. Pardon me. So next image, please. So this is another piece by Jim Dine that I mentioned, one of the few artists who's repeated in Sculpture Milwaukee. So if you'll recall, I think it was in 2018, 2017, we had one of Jim's giant hearts with tools and sort of his little sort of avatar Pinocchio attached to the outside of it. Jim has long done self-portraits in his work, even though he was part of several avant-garde movements in New York City in the 1960s. Since then, he has been associated with the pop art movement, but he doesn't really consider himself to be part of it. He's not making jokes about culture. He's not as ironic as Andy Warhol or Roy Lichtenstein are or perceived to be. This is quite an earnest piece, and some of you may have seen it last year at Expo Chicago. The work has really new meaning for me. I think it's much better in this less crowded environment. I've been thinking a lot about the giant head of Constant in Istanbul, of Constantine, who was the first ruler who welcomed Christianity into the Muslim world in 333 CE. But also you think about just the remnants of other ancient cultures. You see heads of Ramses, but you don't see the rest of the sculpture. So there's some real art history sort of associations here. But just to be sure, Russell checked with the artist just to make sure that our understanding of the piece was true. And that is that the artist is really thinking of himself trapped with these branches, but trapped in his body, trapped as a white man of his age, trapped by the limitations that age brings with us, our physical mobility, trapped by the changing world around us. I find this work really very mournful in a way, but very realistic about, the wisdom that comes with age. So I really come to really grow to like this piece quite a lot. The next image, please. Anna Fasshauer. Oh, did we miss one, Erin? I think we missed one. Yeah, there we go. Amy Yeo's work was curated into the exhibition by Mary Jane Jacob, quite a well-known curator, teaches at the School of the Art Institute, and is one of the first curators to do a public art program in the vein of Sculpture Milwaukee. So she's a real pioneer in the field. This work by Amy Yeo's was done in collaboration with her students at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where there were all these different elements in different colors, different geometric forms, and it was stop animation. And so the team did over 1,000 movements to get this piece. And so it's a moving piece. You can see the video on our website, but when you see the piece downtown, there's a really charming soundtrack to it. And it makes you think of Metropolis, all humans being turned into cogs in a machine. And it's a very charming little piece. Sometimes the pieces get caught hitting one another, and it makes you think of a bottleneck at a staff meeting. There's some really lovely, very subtle associations that you can get from this piece. And it's very bright and colorful and really pretty fun. So next image. This is a piece by Anna Fasshauer, a German artist. This piece is called Tallulah Rhapsody. These are fairly random associations that Anna has. She's thinking about musical instruments with the piece. But Anna is also doing an art history hack. She's hacking into the tradition of very macho minimalism. And she made a series of works when she was in residence in Marfa, Texas, which is the home of Donald Judd. She physically bends the pieces herself. So she's really using a really well-known feminist tradition of physical labor to challenge the macho-ness of a lot of the sculpture by Judd and John Chamberlain. When you look at this piece, you might think of John Chamberlain's Crushed Cars. These are just some elements that she got in El Paso, Texas. And the piece is painted blue because of the blue of the sky over Marfa, Texas. So there are all these different layers in her work. I think of Linda Benglis and a lot of that generation's work to upend our understanding about who can make really very robust sculpture, outdoor sculpture in particular. But I also think the playfulness makes me think of, what Paula Crown has done and what Tony Tassett have done as well.
The color, Marilu, reminds me of our Anne Truitt, another female sculptor playing in the boys' playground of monumental minimalist sculpture as well.
That's a great parallel too. And Anne Truitt being, not as well known as she deserves to be, because she is that generation, that sort of first generation of feminist artists really fighting against the narratives that we tell ourselves about sculpture in the 1960s and 70s. Next image. You all may remember this piece by Milwaukee-based artist Paul Druka, Shoreline Repast. It was originally installed at O'Donnell Park. We wanted to bring it back out because we felt that there was still some really lovely associations with and sort of reverberations between the Paula Crown concern for waterways and Paul's meditation on all the generations of people who have used the lakes and the rivers of this region to convene, to connect, and to really nourish themselves with the waters here. This piece is in Catalana Square, very close to Mayed. It's sort of facing Mayed, very close to the river as well. And I think that the architecture really gives the piece a really great sort of brace. At O'Donnell Park, it was really very open. People loved the piece though, although they kept complaining to the city Department of Public Works that the piece was sinking. And that's very deliberate. Paul really wants to suggest the fact that the history that we take for truth today may not be the truth that we use tomorrow. So really some very subtle associations there. So one more image. And then brought back from last year, overwintered in Milwaukee, is the Carlos Rolón on your left, the Roxy Payne at Northwestern Mutual in the middle. Go see the piece if you haven't this year. The landscape around the work has changed dramatically from last year. All the plantings are really growing in, and it really provides quite a beautiful frame for the Roxy Payne. And then Beverly Pepper on the right. When I was putting this slide together, since you all have probably seen these works quite a lot, one thing that really occurred to me about these three pieces is they're all dealing with landscape and our perceptions of landscape. Carlos Rolón is thinking about how when the Spanish colonizers came to the Caribbean, they permanently changed the landscapes. And so Carlos is sort of recolonizing this international style architecture, which is also an immigrant from Europe. The Roxy Payne talking about how we V-trim trees so that we can avoid, with the V-trimming like this, we can avoid electrical lines, but about how trees and I think other species communicate in nonverbal ways, underground, exchanging resources. And Beverly Pepper thinking about how she can take the very hard materials of the earth and make them really very soft and curvaceous like this piece. So I want to talk, prompted by Margaret's question about what are our hopes for Sculpture Milwaukee, pardon me. In the next slide, you know, one of the things that Steve Marcus really hoped for was that there would be a legacy of works staying in Milwaukee. And we've been really very fortunate to have anonymous donors and some corporations buy artworks and donate them to local businesses, nonprofits, really. So you see your Love sculpture right there. We're really proud of how that work looks. The Tony Craigs in front of City Hall, Michelle Grabner on the right on the top, that's been donated to the historic Third Ward. That's installed on the Riverwalk. And then bottom left, that's the Arlene Shuckett from 2019 that was purchased and donated to the Hank Aaron State Trail. So when you go for a walk or a bike ride along the trail, you'll see the piece. Ratcliffe Bailey in front of the BMO Harris building, Deborah Butterfield inside the lobby of the St. Kate, and then last on the lower right is Sanford Bigger's piece. That piece was purchased and donated to America's Black Holocaust Museum. They are not quite open yet, but once they open, you'll be able to see that piece again. So, Margaret, you had asked how the show's been received. We get a lot of great press, a lot of interest by the public. The thing about public art is we don't have docents standing next to each artwork tracking people's eyes as they sort of scrape across the artworks. We typically use the numbers from Visit Milwaukee and then the very deliberate, direct sort of connections that we have through our educational programs, the MAM trolley tours, et cetera. It's going to have to be a lot more flexible this year. A lot of our marketing data comes from people who have looked at our website, who have downloaded our app, not our app, but have looked at listened to our audio tours, et cetera. So our website has become a much more active marker for people sort of using things. I want to encourage everybody to go online and look at our website. You hear Neri Ward's voice, you hear Anna Fasshauer's voice, you hear Ratcliffe Bailey's voice. We've got a lot of really great educational materials this year as well. You can download our map, or you can find that on some of the sculptures. You can check our website as you're going through the exhibition. So COVID-19, how has it impacted us? About half the artworks this year are going to live through 2021, so that we've got a rolling exhibition. I've invited the artists and a lot of our community friends and members, like Margaret Andera, who did one of our audio tours for us. So you really hear the community in our audio tours. And the book group was really intended to give us other ways to connect with the artists in the exhibition. So final slide, just how you can connect with us. And that's it for me, Margaret. Do you have questions, and does the group have questions?
Yeah, there are a couple questions. So please, this would be a great time if you have specific questions, just enter them into the chat. And before I go to that, I just wanted to ask, Erin, if you can go back one slide. So this is, we're used to Sculpture Milwaukee being along Wisconsin Avenue, but you kind of broke off this year. What prompted that decision to kind of find the sculpture in other parts of the city?
So we were approached by the Black Box Fund to talk about expanding into the Third Ward, and so that was a great partnership and sponsorship opportunity for us. I know there are a lot of people who would like us to expand across the community. Capacity is something that we have to think about, but also protecting the works in our care is really critical. So we know that the folks in the Third Ward have an active sort of security force, lots of security cameras, et cetera. Luckily, the legacy works are being spread a little bit around the city as well, mainly downtown, mainly sort of in our central core area, but we're really hoping over time that the works might sort of, expand into the community in different ways, and then we can sort of, partner with other people like the America's Black Holocaust Museum for programming, et cetera. So I think right now we have to really preserve our resources and our staff, our very small staff's time, and really focus on this sort of really easy area to navigate. But, Margaret, I would sort of toss this back at you. When you travel and people do, you have your main exhibition and then offsite works, sometimes you run out of time and you don't get to see the offsite works, and you always feel bad for those artists. If you have a week, you can see a lot of things in Venice, but maybe you don't see a lot of things, it's, right. So we're really very mindful of people's time and their inclinations. This really allows us to tell a very good narrative, come downtown, see the works, join the restaurants, go see MAM, go see the other cultural organizations around, and really see how Milwaukee is changing. But for right now, it's also just ease of navigation.
Great. So there are a couple of questions. Ellen Flesh has asked, was the airflow of the lighthouse with flapping windows and doors part of the original sculpture or an added feature when you restructured the piece for this installation?
So the windows were not flexible when it was indoors. However, it was one of the requests the engineering team made to make sure that wind could blow through the piece rather than lifting off or ripping the vinyl panels. So it's really about its airflow.
Great, yeah. And then Mary Allman asks, how do you decide where each piece will be located? Do the artists have any influence in the location?
So the curatorial team generally makes the decisions about location. Sometimes artists really want to know where works are going to go. Sometimes they ask for us to move the works, but we really do have limited locations along Wisconsin Avenue. As I mentioned, there are only some locations where we can have very heavy works. There are only so many plazas or open corners where we can have larger works. And we have to really be very mindful of things that you might not think about. So our first year, we had the Manolo Valdez on the very eastern end of Wisconsin Avenue. We were going to put it on the sidewalk in front of that walkway down to Michigan Avenue. And the public service ambassadors who were part of the bid team said, no, do not put work there because that's where the skateboarders go. And so there are all these really nuanced things that we have to be mindful of. We have put artworks on the Chase Bank Plaza, for example, the Joel Shapiro, but that's like a super highway for seagulls. We got a lot of bird poop that year. And so we have a team that cleans things off, but if if we can find another location where the works won't need quite as much daily attention, that's really better for the work so that we can really maintain the integrity and the aesthetic that the artist really wants. So there are all kinds of decisions that we make. It's like working in any museum. You think about, how does the work look the best here? Does it want the embrace of a building, the good backdrop of a building? Can it take more open space? So there are all kinds of conversations that are both practical and also aesthetic.
Generally, though, we don't have to think about bird poop.
You do not, which is really good.
And Barbara Fulner has a comment more than a question, and that is, she says, it would be nice to have one of the water ones later in the Harbor District.
Boy, if you know anyone who would like to take one of the water pieces and put it there, I agree with you. That would be really pretty spectacular. I think either the Paula Crown or the Paul Druka or the Maggie Sasso, to see them permanently sort of mark what is so central to our place. We are here because of the confluence of these rivers and because of the presence of the lake. And, to really mark these locations is a pretty great thing. And I feel very lucky that we have such great philanthropists in the community that see that logic too.
Yeah, great. So that is the last question that I see. So I want to thank you, Marilu. This was great. What a challenging year, and you rose to the challenge and then some. And you've given everybody on this call, they are fully equipped to go and experience Sculpture Milwaukee now. I'm sure we'll look at the website, see the new programs that are coming through with your education initiatives. And I love the website really is activated. It's changing. We've all had to do that, right? In this year, we've all had to really beef up our online presence, and Sculpture Milwaukee has done a really great job. So thank you so much for tonight. And before we sign off, everybody, I just want to remind everybody that our next virtual program is actually not terribly long from now. It's Thursday, October 1st, and it's a conversation with Michelle Grabner and Sky Hopinka. So it's a nice segue. We've seen Sky's work, CAS acquired it. We've seen it in Sculpture Milwaukee, and then we'll talk about his exhibition at Poor Farm with Michelle.
Super. Great.
So take care, everybody. Good night, and thanks again, Marilu.
Thank you. Bye.